Hello, everyone. If you think politics is just about policy documents and press briefings, think twice. What happened inside Hearing Chamber 4 on Capitol Hill rocked the very idea of accountability in government. Two names, one volatile clash. Jasmine Crockett and Marco Rubio. Under the soft glow of brass chandeliers and the silent pressure of a crowded chamber, time felt suspended. Crockett sat forward, documents clutched in her hand, her eyes fixed on the figure across from her. She wasn't there to entertain. She arrived to pose the one question no one else dared. Across the room, Marco Rubio leaned back, arms steady, cool like a commander in his element. He had faced scrutiny before, but this felt distinct. Beyond the walls, headlines were poised to be written. But within, the tension was intimate. A real estate deal in the Middle East, a billion-dollar crypto contract, a sudden weapons sale, and one pointed question. When business meets government, who really profits? Crockett's voice slashed through the silence like a blade. Rubio's reply came deliberately, strategically, like a chess move meant to quiet. This wasn't a yelling contest. This was a high-stakes confrontation, muted, precise, and indelible. Before we delve into what happened next, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to follow more stories that question what power really means. The crowd caught its breath. Behind the lengthy wood-paneled desk, Jasmine Crockett raised her eyes and adjusted the microphone. The faint feedback hissed like a warning. All eyes shifted toward her, not because she raised her volume, but because she didn't. Her calm was intentional, weighty, unsettling. "Mr. Rubio," she began, her tone razor-sharp, "even as Special Envoy for International Affairs, you've overseen numerous vital negotiations this quarter, but I'd like to direct attention to one sequence of events that, honestly, has raised questions across this body." Rubio, seated at the witness table, moved only subtly. No papers in front of him, no aides leaning in. Just him, a glass of water, and a slight, unreadable smile. Crockett continued. 13 days ago, the White House announced a $1.3 billion commercial real estate initiative, the Midtown Qatar complex, by the Trump International Development Group. She stopped, letting the words linger. 3 days later, Blockchain, Sovereign Wealth, a company with confirmed majority ownership by the Trump family, signed a $2.5 billion technology investment deal with Doha Coin, one of the leading state-aligned crypto groups in Qatar. She left the link simmer. Then 5 days after that, your office authorized an expedited arms sale, $1.1 billion worth, to the same government. My question is straight. Is this a coincidence or something more? The words landed, not like a grenade, but like a slow-falling mallet. Reporters lurched forward, pens ready. Marco blinked hard. His hand grazed the glass, but he didn't sip. "Congresswoman," he replied calmly, "I respect the work you've put into compiling that timeline, but the idea that foreign policy decisions are being influenced by unrelated business interests is conjecture." She didn't waver. "Speculative," she echoed, her voice curt. "The lead negotiator on arms sales to Qatar is testifying days after his administration greenlit 2 separate billion-dollar deals directly linked to the sitting president's business empire. I don't believe asking for answers is speculative. I believe it's proper." A whisper rose in the room. Rubio remained still, except for one soft tap of his index finger on the table. Rap, rap, then silence. "Let me be crystal," he stated. "National security partnerships, especially in regions like the Gulf, are built over years, not in news headlines. The weapons bundle you mentioned, those contracts were drafted over 18 months ago and were reviewed by bipartisan panels long before any private transaction took place." Crockett nodded quietly, absorbing the response, but not backing. "And yet," she said, "those same bipartisan panels placed brief pauses, didn't they? Particularly Congressman Kendrick Allen, who raised humanitarian concerns just last month. Yet your office moved with an emergency approval, bypassing those holds. Was that solely a security judgment, or did external factors weigh in?" Rubio reclined back, folding his hands steadily. "The exemption was issued under Clause 36B of the Arms Export Control Act, fully legal, fully briefed, and again entirely independent of any business dealings by American citizens abroad. It was a classic answer, clean, measured, and it didn't sit right with her. Crockett looked toward the spectators seated behind the dais. A few Capitol aides whispered. A reporter from the Washington Tribune scribbled notes at lightning pace. Melissa Tran, always catching the subtlety others ignored, didn't look down once. Crockett pivoted again to Rubio. Let's clarify now. Does the Trump family own a majority stake in blockchain sovereign wealth? I don't answer for private citizens. Rubio replied swiftly. But the company's ownership, if publicly disclosed, is a matter of documentation. She reached down and raised a one-sheet printout. Then you won't mind me reading from their investor summary issued 3 weeks ago. Marco didn't reply. According to filings submitted to the SEC and published on the firm's own website, the Trump family holds a 65% ownership stake through 3 distinct entities. That's not a silent partner. That's clear gain. She set the paper aside. So, again I ask, you believe it's proper for a current president's family to receive foreign investment from a government his administration is simultaneously arming? Rubio didn't respond. Not immediately, not heatedly. Instead, he sat quietly for a moment, a long moment, as if measuring every inhale. Then he said, Congresswoman, the Constitution allows the president's family to pursue legal business so long as no executive authority is misused. And to this date, no evidence of any misuse has been shown. One beat. Then he continued, your timeline is striking, but timelines aren't proof. Crockett breathed softly. Not anger, not loss, focus. You're right, she said. Timelines aren't proof, but they are patterns. And patterns prompt questions, especially when those patterns include billions of dollars in American-made missiles. She let it linger. So let me ask you directly. Have you or your office completed an internal review of any potential conflicts arising from this sequence of events? Rubio lifted one brow. No such review has been considered required, he said, because to date, no ethics advisory has signaled concern. Crockett turned towards the committee chair, then back to Rubio. Maybe it's time someone acted. For the first time, his finger halted drumming. The room appeared to breathe once. But beneath that calm surface, the line had been set. This wasn't regarding theatrics. It wasn't concerning sound bites. It was about the steady flame of accountability, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Crockett's gaze stayed steady. The hearing had just begun, and the heat was already climbing. The hearing room hadn't moved, but something in the atmosphere had changed. Jasmine Crockett reclined back gently, the weight of the silence pressing against her shoulders. She had arrived primed. She memorized every line of that timeline, every number, every footnote. But Marco Rubio, measured, refined, unruffled, had answered without answering. That was the true talent. Not in denying the facts, but in making them seem trivial. She turned to a new page in her binder. Mr. Rubio, she said, quieter now, more measured. Since you raised constitutional limits, let's be clear. The president's legal authority to own companies is not what's in question here. The issue is ethical, whether a head of state should profit, even indirectly, from policy choices. Rubio didn't flinch. Morals, he said. Nodding. A fair term. But ethics demand clarity, and clarity requires more than implication. Crockett raised up a new document. This is a memo from the Office of Congressional Ethics, requesting additional review of fresh overseas transactions involving entities tied to the presidential family. It's not a subpoena. Not yet, but it's a start. Rubio tapped his pen softly upon the desk. That letter was not sent to my office, he said calmly. And we have not been advised to change path based on it. Crockett breathed through her nose, carefully masking frustration. She knew that tactics shift responsibility, shove the burden onto another agency. But the pattern, the sequence, the overlaps visible of that could be overlooked. Congressman Kendrick Allen, she said, turning slightly toward the panel, placed a brief hold on the weapons shipment weeks ago. His concern wasn't commercial. It was altruistic. Civilian displacement in the region. Yet that hold was ignored without further review. Why? Rubio responded swiftly, too quickly. The nature of security cooperation often requires prompt decisions. When allies face perils, delay can mean fragility. And when transparency is delayed, Crockett shot back, it can mean complicity. A whisper spread behind her, but no one spoke. Her tone hadn't risen, yet it cut sharper. Rubio nodded slowly, the edges of his mouth tensing just a bit. "You're suggesting causation where none has been shown," he said. "Again, your concern is noted, but your findings are unsupported." Crockett set down her binder. Her hands rested softly on the table. "Then let me pose you not as a prosecutor, but as a neighbor. When decisions involving billions of dollars coincide so neatly with private business interests, do you believe we, as public servants, have a duty to investigate, even if only to rule out impropriety?" Rubio was silent for a moment, just a moment. "I think," he said, "we have a duty not to weaponize coincidence." The phrase landed heavier than he likely intended. Crockett squinted her eyes. "Coincidence is what we call it when we don't want to admit there might be something else." Rubio gave a slight smile. "Or when there isn't." Somewhere behind them, a journalist coughed softly. The clicking of pens had ceased. All ears were locked on the back and forth. Crockett reached for her next exhibit, Mr. Rubio. "This document details the overseas bank holdings of blockchain sovereign wealth, including subsidiaries and jurisdictions with restricted financial transparency: Qatar, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands." Rubio clasped his hands. "All lawful jurisdictions. Many U.S. firms function there, certainly," Crockett said. "But not all firms are owned by families whose decisions impact worldwide policy. That's the distinction. That's why we ask questions." She placed the file down with care. "The American public isn't searching for controversy. They're looking for assurance that we are not for sale." Rubio leaned subtly ahead. "Then give them assurance," he said. "Through facts, not hint. Through oversight, not blame. If you have evidence of misconduct, present. But don't weaponize perception. That's how trust genuinely erodes." Crockett nodded. "So we agree that perception counts." Rubio blinked. "Perception must be guided, otherwise it turns paranoia." Crockett folded her hands. "Sometimes perception is the first indicator that something's amiss, not proof but alarm." Rubio glanced toward the panel, then back at her, and warnings uninvestigated are just noise. For the first time, Crockett felt the sting of momentum fading, not because she lacked material, she had ample, but because Rubio wasn't yielding. He wasn't dismissive or evasive in the normal sense. He was methodical, disciplined everything, wrapped in credible reasoning, and that made him tougher to pin down. She glanced toward Congressman Allen, who gave a subtle nod of support. She glanced around. "Then let's keep this extra direct. In the past 6 months, has your office conducted, initiated, or participated in any independent ethics review regarding the intersection of national policy and presidential business holdings overseas?" "No," Rubio stated plainly. "Have you been urged to, right? Would you back such a review if sought by this committee?" He hesitated. "If the committee presents a formal resolution, and if it satisfies the criteria for jurisdictional relevance, yes, I would back it." It wasn't an affirmation, it wasn't a denial, it was policy cloaked in protocol. And the time was racing. Crockett knew the instant was slipping, not lost but no longer hers to steer. She moved to reset. "Then let me phrase it this way," she continued. "If this same pattern of business alignment and policy approval happened under any prior administration, Democrat or Republican, would you voice the identical concern?" Rubio's response was muted, nearly soft enough to miss. If the concern were legit, indeed. If it was not, never. Crockett leaned back gently. That answer wasn't solid enough to anchor her argument, and she realized it. She'd taken the best shot in this round, but it hadn't landed with the punch she expected. Still waiting. Crockett wasn't beaten, yet the room had chilled. She peeked at the timekeeper's lamp. Just minutes remain. Her final decision had to matter. Crockett looked down at her notes, but her mind was already forward. The room hadn't turned on her, but she could feel its gravity shifting just subtly, like a boat tilting under pressure. She had to steer it home, not with volume, but with accuracy. Her voice cut in cleanly. "Mr. Rubio, let's quit dancing around the fringes. Skip what-ifs. Let's talk plainly here and today. If a sitting president's private business secures financial gains from a foreign government, And that same government simultaneously benefits from advantageous U.S. policy decisions. Do you consider that ethically acceptable? Rubio never blinked. Both hands remained clasped. Only if there is direct evidence that the policy was swayed by the financial interest, he said. Otherwise, we are entering a realm where assumptions become accusations. So you're claiming, Crockett pushed, that even when timing, ownership, and benefit align perfectly, it still doesn't warrant alarm unless someone finds a smoking gun. I'm stating, Rubio replied, that we should not exploit perception. Association is not causality. It's an initial step, she said. Not a decision, but a signal sign. He leaned forward subtly. And if we chased every warning sign without evidence, we'd seldom govern. Oversight should be keen, yet it must be fair. Crockett felt a spark of frustration growing. Rubio wasn't deflecting out of dread. He was deflecting with assurance, and that made it tougher. Then let me ask you plainly anew, because the American people deserve clarity. Do you see a moral problem when a president's family gains from a foreign investment tied to a country receiving military aid from that same administration? Rubio gazed straight at her. Not if the aid is justifiable on national security grounds and the investment is lawful and open. Crockett let the silence linger just ample enough. Do you believe legality is the sole yardstick of ethics? He answered swiftly. No, but legality must remain foremost. Ethics without grounding is mere opinion. This was the instant, the kind of response that seems clean but leaves residue. Crockett inched forward, her tone chilling. That's exactly what folks dread. That as long as something dodges the law, it doesn't matter how it looks, how it feels, or how many citizens lose faith in the system because of it. He nodded gently. That's why openness matters. That's why we maintain procedures. And what value is transparency, she said? If no one investigates the truth it reveals. For a moment, Rubio didn't answer. A camera snapped softly. A journalist jotted quicker. Crockett sensed the tempo had changed. Crockett pressed on. Let's say this pattern occurred under a different administration, different name, different party. Would you call for an inquiry? Rubio shifted his stance. If the evidence warranted it, yes. So then not yet? She asked. Because the data don't merit it, he answered. Crockett's mouth tensed. That's not a truth. That's your view. Rubio held her gaze. That's what I'm here to provide. Crockett paused for a moment, scrolling to her final document. Then let me put this in front of you, she said, holding up an official financial summary from Blockchain Sovereign. Wealth showing transaction flows into a shell account registered to a trust affiliated with the Trump Development Group. This is not guesswork. It's a ledger. 1 week before the arms deal was completed, this trust received a $112 million payment directly linked to the crypto agreement. I'm not blaming. I'm asking, does that trouble you? Rubio's expression shifted slightly. A flicker, not panic, but assessment. That's the first I've seen that file, he said calmly. I won't speak on a document I haven't confirmed. Very. Crockett nodded. Then confirm it, but don't ignore it. I'm not ignoring it, Rubio answered. But I also won't permit a hearing to become a trial based on timing and innuendo. Crockett set the paper down. It's not a courtroom. It's an inquiry. And I've addressed it, he stated. You've reacted to it, she clarified, not answered. That pause lingered further. This time the chamber was still. Rubio's aides looked nervous now. Even the sympathetic press in the back row had stopped grinning. He could sense it, and Crockett knew he sensed it. She drew an inhalation. Her tone eased, but her words were even pointier. Mr. Senator Rubio, if we continue to assume that public trust survives just because we follow the rules as narrowly as possible, then we've already failed the people who sent us here. Rubio's response was calmer now. Trust isn't built on outrage. It's built on outcomes. And the outcome today is national security, not gain. But gain occurred, she said, and safety, like ethics, should not be used to justify the rest. The chamber sighed collectively. A quick rustle from the gallery. Someone murmured, "She cornered him." Jasmine didn't twitch. Rubio reclined, thoughtful. His next words would count, but instead of answering, he said, I yield to the chair. for additional questions. It was measured, respectful, but also tactical. The moment had reached its zenith, and he chose to depart, not escalate. Crockett sat down gently, palms still steady. Jasmine didn't grin. This wasn't solely about triumph. It was regarding effect. And this time she sensed it hit. Outside the chamber, cameras lurked like wolves in mist. The moment Marco Rubio stepped through the doors, flashes erupted across the stone hall. Rubio didn't hesitate. No fist pumps, no smiles for the cameras. Just a calm walk flanked by 2 aides and a low voice saying, "This way, sir." Reporters yelled questions mostly about Crockett's documents, but Rubio gave silence. His eyes were forward, focused, controlled. Inside, the chamber still resonated with what had just happened. Jasmine Crockett remained seated, back straight. But her hands had relaxed around the pile of exhibits. She didn't glance at anybody. Not quite. Congressman Kendrick Allen leaned over and whispered, "You kept your stance." Jasmine didn't reply, never out of rudeness. She was silently reviewing every line, every word, every pause. Influence isn't always cheers. Sometimes it's the quiet afterwards. She collected her materials deliberately, like a surgeon after a long procedure. She realized it hadn't been flawless. He hadn't buckled. He hadn't given her the explosive moment. But she had pushed him into silence, and that mattered more. In the corridor, Rubio walked past the press pool without interacting. One reporter muttered, "Rough round in there." He bobbed once but kept walking. An aide beside him said softly, "You handled it. No spin needed." Rubio never replied. His thoughts were already sorting her final words. Trust isn't forged on outrage. It's built on results. There was weight. In that line, something he knew would resonate. He reached the elevator, stepped in, and vanished behind the shutting doors. Back in her office, Jasmine set the last folder on her desk. The afternoon sun had shifted, spilling long streaks across the floor. She sat still, letting the weight of the moment sink. The queries she asked weren't just for the panel. They were for the record, for history, for the young interns now replaying the hearing on their phones, wondering if honesty can still find its way through clamor. The phone vibrated. A text from a retired law school professor read, "You didn't triumph, but you didn't lose either. You held the line." Another message arrived from an aide in Ohio. "That was the first time I saw someone voice what we've all been pondering." Jasmine breathed, not in relief but in resolve. This isn't finished, it rarely ends. Ethics doesn't live in a quick clip. It lives in what occurs after. She grabbed a yellow legal pad and began writing notes, follow-ups, a list of transactions, to cross-check with Treasury disclosures, not because she expected a headline, but because the work had to continue. Elsewhere in the building, Rubio stepped into a small adjacent conference room. Only one aide followed. "What now?" the assistant asked. Rubio took his jacket, laid it on the chair back, and stared out the slim window. "We examine the file," he murmured softly. "If there's nothing there, we let it pass. If there is..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. In his realm, strategy was not a show, it was levels. Meanwhile, Crockett took a moment before exiting her office. She stared at her reflection, in the black screen of her laptop, not searching for reassurance, only stillness. She stood, picked up the original folder from the hearing, and tucked it under her arm. The hallway outside was silent. No cameras now, only staffers shuffling between rooms, conversations about schedules, agenda drafts, coffee orders. But every couple steps someone made eye contact, a nod, a glance that stayed half a moment too long. She was being noticed, not celebrated, not judged, simply seen. And that in Washington was a kind of momentum. She turned a corner and passed a group of junior staffers murmuring by the elevator. One of them stood and said, "Congresswoman Crockett, that was powerful." She gave a brief smile, kept walking, not for pride, simply to keep her mind on track. Impact isn't measured in comments. It's measured in who keeps thinking about what was said after the chamber goes quiet. That night, news anchors replayed segments. Some focused on Rubio's exactness, others lauded Crockett's tenacity. On one network, a commentator said, "She didn't take the argument, but she reframed it." On another, the line was, "Rubio stayed steady, but Crockett made people uneasy in all the right ways." Social media divided as expected, but in the midst of the noise, a thread began circulating, a snippet of Crockett saying, "Legality without ethics is just permission to ignore the people we serve." That one quote, just 10 seconds long, began picking up steam. Not because it was noisy, but because it was honest. In living rooms, law schools, city council offices, people viewed not only what was said, but how it was said. And some of them quietly started digging further into blockchain sovereign wealth. Not because they were told to, but because someone chose to ask if they should. That's how change starts. Not with fire, but with a question that refused to be dismissed. In the days that followed, the hearing slipped from the headlines, but not from the conversation. Cable news moved on to fresh fires, fresh fights. Yet something about that subtle confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Marco Rubio refused to vanish. Not because it was volatile, but because it was unresolved. Podcasts unpacked it. Analysts argued it. Learners in political science classrooms replayed crucial moments and asked each other the same question Crockett had posed: where is the boundary between legality and validity? One editorial in a Midwestern paper wrote, "Rubio shielded the system, Crockett questioned its soul." That sentence made its way into hundreds of reposts, not because it was loud, but because it seized a feeling people couldn't shake. At a tiny college in Vermont, a professor streamed the hearing in her civic ethics class. Afterward, a learner raised their hand and asked, "Do we only expect integrity when it's convenient or when it's hard?" In Washington, Rubio returned his routine: meetings, briefings, interviews. He gave his regular sound bites, measured, focused, never guarded. When asked directly about Crockett's questions, he plainly replied, "We answered what needed to be answered." The record stands for itself. But even in his inner circle, the mood had changed. His staffers began requesting more thorough background checks on foreign alliances, not because anyone told them to, but because they knew watchers were watching now. Silent accountability, no press. Releases, just figures moving a bit differently. Crockett, meanwhile, kept working. No triumph lap, no viral monologue, just a building sense that something had tilted. In her home district community, members began referencing her phrase from the hearing. At town halls, people stood and cited her words. Transparency means nothing if we ignore what it reveals. It was no more about that one company, that one agreement. It had become about the bigger question: when those in power profit from the system, who's left to protect the principle behind it? One evening, as she left her office, a junior intern stood nervously by the elevator. "Congresswoman," they said, "I don't mean to trouble you. I simply wanted to say thank you. Not for the show, for the pressure. You reminded people it's okay to push for clarity." Crockett smiled softly. "It's not merely okay," she said. "It's necessary." Across the country, in online forums and private chats, people analyzed her exchange with Rubio as a scandal, but as a case study. Some commended Rubio's restraint. Others applauded Crockett's bravery, but most agreed on one thing: it wasn't noise. It was essential unease, and in that unease, something uncommon had happened. People listened not just to the words, but to the pause. Between them, in a world addicted to spectacle, they had witnessed a moment where neither side shouted, yet both demanded something greater: accountability without rage, exactness without fear. A graduate student wrote an online post called "The Crockett-Rubio Instant: How Quiet Questions Can Shake Mighty Institutions." It rippled swiftly in academic circles. Crockett didn't reshare it. She didn't require it. The message had long settled. Months afterward, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs declared a bipartisan review of conflict of interest procedures for executive family business ties. The statement made no mention of the hearing, but those who had watched knew where the idea was planted. It never led to spectacle. It produced action. And in Washington, that's the real echo of a potent question. No noise, movement, nor headlines. Progress. One evening, Crockett sat quietly in her kitchen, a yellow legal pad in front of her. She was crafting draft language for a bill centered on financial disclosure reform. She stopped and looked out the window at the still street below. Then she scribbled one sentence at the top of the sheet: "Let questions speak before power silences them." She didn't know if it would pass, but she knew it had to be asked because in a republic, silence is not just a void, it's a decision, and she had made hers. Back in Florida, Rubio drafted remarks for a panel on foreign diplomacy. In his draft, there was a new line he hadn't used before. Trust in governance isn't just about results. It's about reminding people that our motives are deserving of their consent. His scriptwriter raised an eyebrow. "That's fresh," they said. Rubio nodded. It should have been there all along. The Crockett-Rubio session became a marker, hardly a scandal in all, but a second when the system was reminded softly, sharply that it's being watched, that the people still worry about the border between legal and right, that even when no one falls, the questions still rise. And if those questions are asked clearly enough, bravely enough, they don't vanish. They resonate. Not through speakers, but through the inner conscience of a country still deciding who it wants to be. What occurred between Jasmine Crockett and Marco Rubio wasn't just a collision of ideas. It was a reminder that even in a split room, a well-placed question can still rattle the walls. It wasn't concerning who prevailed. It wasn't regarding who spoke loudest. It was about who stayed anchored in principle and who stepped away knowing. The weight of accountability had shifted. Crockett didn't require a banner. She didn't seek claps. She wanted the question to hit. Yes, it stuck. In classrooms, boardrooms, long night kitchen tables, people spoke because that's the true impact. Not viral for a moment, but flowing into how we think, how we trust, how we demand better. This narrative wasn't about turmoil. It was regarding honesty. It asked, can power still hear? Can truth still count without shouting? And can a single voice, steady and sharp, still move the system? Jasmine Crockett told us the answer is affirmative. If this story touched you even for a moment, don't let it stop here. Comment below what question you think still needs asking. And if you feel stories like this deserve to be told, follow the channel and turn on notifications, because the next time power is questioned, you'll want to be there when it happens. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that don't just make sound, but make us reflect.